This is the Ramana Maharshi Atma Vidya satsang, a time to listen, reflect, and to deeply inquire into the self. Know yourself and be always free and at peace. Welcome. I'm Richard Clarke, hosting this satsang. I've been blessed with years of deep practice and teaching, and I bring this to the satsang. This week I continue with Atma Vidya, the fourth of 5 verses. Atma Vidya is one of several books written by Ramana Maharshi that were initiated by Muruganar. Thank you, Muruganar. Now for the fourth verse. These are Ramana's words. What is the use of knowing everything except the self? What else is there to know for anyone when the self itself is known? On realizing in oneself the self, which is the only self-effulgent one in myriad of selves, the light of the self will clearly shine within. This is indeed the true display of grace, the ego's death, and the unfolding of bliss supreme. Ramana starts this verse with, what is the use of knowing everything except the self? The self is always. Everything else comes and goes. Knowledge of the self is knowledge that is permanent. It never changes. Knowledge of all else is transient, temporary. Ramana says that what is real is what is always. The transient is no more real than last night's dream. Knowing the self is knowing what is always. Knowing everything else is like knowing the scales on the snake that was then recognized as the rope. Where are the scales now that you know it is a rope? What use is it to know more about what never existed to begin with? Next, Ramana says, what else is there to know when the self itself is known? Everything, every person, object, world, idea of a higher power, all of these exist in your awareness, in the consciousness that is the self. The self is all. There are no separate objects or people. The self is all. Ideas of separate things are just ideas, no more than phantoms, impermanent, changing. Their only existence is as the self. Ideas of difference are just ideas in the one reality with no this and that. Differences are imaginary. Then Ramana says, on realizing in oneself the self, which is the only self-effulgent one in myriad of selves, the light of the self will clearly shine within. Everything in the world, including the idea of self that is the ego I, including the world, is only known by the light of the awareness that is the self. Everything is known by the self. What lights up the self? What knows the self? Only the self can know the self. The self is the only knower. All that is known by this knower. This knower is self-effulgent, lit by its own light. I use the inquiry, who knows this, as another angle of vision for inquiry. Objects are known by the mind. Who knows the mind? Thoughts and feelings are known by the mind. Who knows the mind? Many things are known, but there is only one knower. Look for yourself and verify this. Can you find more than one knower? Finally, Ramana says, this is indeed the true display of grace, the ego's death, and the unfolding of the bliss supreme. Where does the knowledge of the self come from? It is certainly not the mind. The mind cannot know the self, so there is nothing the mind, the ego I, can do to know the self. The most the mind can do is to step out of the way. Yet we can know the self. We do know the self always, all the time, just as we know our existence all the time. But we usually don't notice. Somehow, Ramana says, by grace, we are able to see and know what we are, what we have always been, the self. Knowing this, the false ego has no place to stand and dissolves. It dies. This disappearance of what never really existed to begin with brings the deepest happiness and bliss. You know that you are the bliss. And now my teacher, Nome, with a discourse, abide as the self.
The self is absolute existence that is without beginning and without end, utterly undifferentiated. This existence is illimitable. If the self is realized as such, that which knows and that which is known are one and the same thing. Existence knows itself with sense-transcendent, mind-transcendent knowledge. If the self is not known, that which does not know actually does not exist. The self cannot harbor any ignorance regarding itself, being of the nature of knowledge or consciousness itself. Another, the non-self, how could that ever know the self? And as the self is existence, the non-knower would be non-existent. Sri Bhagavan, Ribhu, and others exhort those who would be wise to abide as the self. What does it mean? Certainly there are not two selves that one would abide as or realize the other. The self is only one. It implies an absence of misidentification, which alone constitutes ignorance. Ignorance in turn alone constitutes bondage and is the root cause of all suffering. To be free of such, abide as the self. What does it mean? It means knowledge, bereft of ignorance, devoid of misidentification. It is a matter of knowledge, spiritual knowledge, not mere sensations, and not mere thinking, but knowledge. For this knowledge, inquire within yourself to know the nature of your existence, the nature of the innermost consciousness. Abandoning any tendency to misidentify with the body, which is most certainly not the self. Inquire as to the true significance of I. That which you truly are, what is your very existence, is always. So inquire to find that which ever exists within you. It cannot be anything objective, subtle or gross, thought or sensation, for these are all perceived to come and go. Moreover, they are unreal. Their coming and going and their transience is not the definition of their unreality, but it is indicative of it. What are you? What are you always? Your existence is unchanged by the states, activities, and conditions and such of the body. What is this existence? Your existence remains unchanged through the passage of various states and conditions of the mind, such as waking, dreaming, and deep dreamless sleep. What is that existence? To clearly identify yourself as the existence alone, and not the content of the mind and its states, and not the body and the content of the sensations with their attributes, is the dawning of knowledge, true knowledge, self-knowledge. For such knowledge, inquire, who am I? The nature of the inquirer alone is the answer. Know yourself. That is the infinite and eternal existence. That is Brahman. That is the self. The only self there actually is. So then, If you know yourself, the absolute reality comprehends itself. If you suppose that you do not know the self, who is it that does not know? Like this, making your vision non-objective, inquire to know who you are.
And now we will take a few minutes to meditate, self-inquiry. Breathe in and breathe out with long, slow breaths. Feel the breath as it comes in, then as it goes out. Feel your mind get quiet. And now notice that you exist. You exist, and you know you exist without feeling it or thinking about it. You just know. Already this is beyond senses or thought. So now inquire, can you find any non-being in your being? Do you know your being? Do you know your existence? Who knows this being? Is it the mind? Who knows the mind? Feel the light within yourself that knows itself. And now inquire, who am I? What is the nature of my existence? And we'll close with a short chant. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Om. Peace, peace, peace. Thank you for letting me share this teaching with you. Next week we will conclude Atma Vidya. Namaste.